Well, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce someone who I didn't know, but now I do know and has become a good friend, which is one of the wonderful things about working on the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence, is there are a lot of good people. Canada, U.S., Ontario, Quebec, all of the Great Lakes states, all of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence cities. But Dereth has brought a degree of intensity and energy to the International Joint Commission, which I kind of think it needed, and has really, over the last number of years after her appointment by President Obama in 2011, really brought a lot of good things to the IJC. I have the privilege of working for and with the commissioners on the Water Quality Board, which incidentally was totally reconstituted recently to have a much broader base of representation in terms of interests, agriculture, non-government, industry, cities, First Nations, tribes, whatever. But this is in part due to the leadership that Commissioner Glance has brought to the IJC. Although originally from Michigan, she's an upstate New Yorker, primarily Syracuse, and has been actively involved in a number of Great Lakes and environmentally oriented activities in Onondaga County. Did I say that almost right? So please join with me in giving a warm city welcome to Commissioner Dereth Glance.
Thank you, Dave, very, very much. It is absolutely fantastic to work with Dave. And one of the best ways, because the man has more hats than all of you combined, I think. So he's chairing pretty much about everything. I am so happy to be here again. I really appreciate it. I had the pleasure of meeting many of you back in 2012 in Quebec City. That was wonderful. I've now been with the Commission for about 5 years now, and it's just been an incredible experience, and it's given me a very, very interesting perspective, being able to look at some of the wonderful examples of what's happened in Canada, of what's happened in the United States, and inside the Great Lakes Basin and outside the Great Lakes Basin. So we go from Maine to the Yukon, and we share one of the longest, most peaceful borders in the entire world, and 40% of that is made from water. And so I was just struck today by, these are amazing panels. These are the most critical issues that our region needs to be addressing, and I really look forward to the discussion that's going to follow my talk today. We have, we need new thinking, but we still need those same core principles and values. And that's what I keep coming back to, and that I don't think that we can move away from. I'm gonna just share a couple of stories with you. So number one is, the idea, I really like issues that deal with the bowels of society, the major services that are much better given to us collectively than individually. I don't want to own my own water treatment plant. I don't want to treat my own water. I don't want to treat my own sewage. I don't want to bury or take care of my own trash. I think if we do that all together, that's much better. And as mayors, you're the front lines of ensuring that we have basic services that protect our sanitation, our public health, our local environment, and actually give us a quality of life. So I'm free to go do the things that I actually really like to do, which also includes eating, swimming at beaches, and spending time with families, and my family. So I really thank you for the work that you do. In order to do that. So let's talk about water infrastructure. And in particular, I want to, this morning, really, again, reiterate this overwhelming feeling that I have that we need a fundamental change of how society at large values water and the services that it provides. Water too often comes last in the line of thinking. We're thinking about what kind of energy solutions can we get to where we need to go for greenhouse gas emission reductions. And then the water engineers, we aren't even educating them, as kind of what I heard, we kind of afterthoughts. These are not the ones that we're promoting and bringing in. This is not the desired place. And here we are in a region where water is our most defining force, and it could be a place of innovation, and instead we're stuck in kind of the crutches of crisis. And I think it's really important for us to deal with the crises of the day, but find that space to be able to look for how we can make this an asset, to make it the innovation, to make sure that our cities are the place where we want everybody to be. And that means ensuring that we have the services and that the water is clean. So it's too often out of sight, out of mind, until it isn't anymore, because it's flooded our streets, it's closed the downtown businesses, it's unsafe to drink, the fish are unsafe to eat. But water, no matter what, is a resource that everybody needs. We're over 70% water ourselves, and when I had the pleasure of meeting Prime Minister Trudeau, he had a wonderful message that as scary as things may be, as bad as things may be, we may have the desire to turn inward, we have to go outward, because it's strength through our differences. That's how we're stronger, that's how we win, and that's where we have commonalities. And so I had a chance to say, Mr. Prime Minister, what we have more in common with one another, whether it be our bodies or our borders or water, and that's the strength of this region and the leadership and what should be foremost in our mind and not taking a back seat anymore. And that's a pure cultural shift, and we're capable of doing this. Our values evolve over time. It's through a complex process of gaining knowledge, enacting laws, nudging our social norms, and providing tools to comply with higher standards and motivation to avoid negative consequences. So as a kid, my parents converted a 1980 green Ford Econoline van. Such a wonderful vehicle to have growing up. I am an only child. I would spread out with books, coloring books. I had a Game Boy at some point in time. We'd go on trips down to Florida, spend weeks up in Harrisville, Michigan, or Ludington, Michigan, in the Great Lakes, and I just had a grand old time. No, I'm a mom of 3 boys. Never would I ever transport my children in a vehicle where they were not properly with safety restraints. I just wouldn't do that. The cultural norms have completely changed. Nobody thought any different, that it was okay. I'm very glad to be alive. There was never a projectile through a window. I'm lucky. But sometimes you just can't depend on luck alone, and you need to be safe. So those are the kinds of things, things change. I don't drive around with open containers of alcohol in my car for a variety of reasons. We shouldn't think about water last. And that's the kind of fundamental culture change that each of you, you're an agent of change that you can do. And so we've spent a lot of time talking about how to get stuff done, what we should be doing. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, we need, I think one of the key things when we think about Flint and we think about responses to crises, and I'll point to Toledo too, it's the front lines, the mayors, you have to be the honest broker in the situation. So you have to be the ones that say the hard truths. These are the choices. Sometimes it's not pleasant, sometimes it's not convenient, sometimes you wish that wasn't what it is, but people are better knowing the truth than not knowing the truth. And I think the mayor in Toledo did a phenomenal job being very upfront and honest with the concerns of microcystin coming into the crib, telling folks to walk away from the water until they were able to do the adequate tests, and was very upfront and honest about it. I compare that to what happened in Charleston, West Virginia with the leakage into the Kanawha River. That was about a year before that, I believe. And there was so much confusion. And I have family in West Virginia too. So I had, people who worked in nursing homes, cousins of mine in nursing homes that were working in nursing homes that were not able to bathe or give resources to very, very fragile elders of our community. We had people that weren't able to bathe their children, or if they did, were they getting sick and not getting that kind of information? So if we don't know, we have to be honest that we don't know, err on the side of caution, and always keep that integrity. In Flint, you have folks that lost incredible amounts of credibility in government services. So I think that's another piece that needs to come in, is we can't be afraid of the truth. And there's always going to be conflict, I guarantee you. I work for, I'm commissioner with the International Joint Commission. We were created to prevent, avoid, and resolve disputes between the United States and Canada. And thank you, we're best of friends, and we haven't fought very much. But when we do, we can do it constructively. You pick up the phone, you have a conversation with the right person, because you established, you made those relationships. I think that's where it gets to that key point of communication. But I think it's also really important that we have shared principles, and that's what's made the Boundary Waters Treaty so durable over the last 100 years. So there's a hierarchy of uses, there's a parity where there's a central equality. We protect drinking water, sanitation services first, navigation, hydropower, and as well as irrigation, while also at the same time providing a convenient opportunity for all to be heard and the consideration of all other interests, because the drafters, I really think it's a brilliant treaty. Read it if you haven't had a chance to do it. The drafters realized they didn't think of everything, and our mindset has changed over time. So right now, I'll spend a little bit, well, I wrote this thing, but I'm gonna just talk about some of the key things. Our values have changed. We didn't recognize the value of ecosystem services. In the 50s, we thought we could engineer our way out of so many things. We thought that we could control the 14th largest lake in the entire world within a narrow 4-foot range. And we did the best we possibly could with all the engineering, and that's Lake Ontario. And that has caused significant harm to the coastal ecosystem health. So the IJC, after over 15 years of study, extensive public comment, intergovernmental cooperation and working groups have advanced the modernization for how humans influence the water levels and flows on Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River through the Moses-Sonder Dam and other associated works. It's called Plan 2014. We issued it about 2 years ago. Now it's been going through the federal process, and we think it's very important that the two federal governments expedite their review, move forward, and especially while we still have the current leaders in office, and actually allow Lake Ontario to be able to heal herself and restore the incredible rich diversity and biodiversity that's so critical for high levels of ecosystem functioning. That's where humans meet with the water. That's where our flora and fauna thrive. It's the nurseries, and we've basically changed the hydrology, so we've starved out those regions. The IJC had to consider all of the other existing uses and take a systems approach of what's best for the entire system. So, folks have made different decisions. I had people telling me in these public hearings that they designed their shore protection to this 4-foot range. There has been several occasions that even though we did the absolute best, our board did the absolute best to keep levels compress them as tight as possible in that middle part of the range, they still exceeded. So people are making decisions with their hard-earned money for their families, for the properties that have been in their families for a long period of time, not based on fact. It's based on myth. And that's the kind of stuff that we can't be making public policy from. We need to be using real science, joint science, and engaged public, and moving forward based on the truth, whether it's comfortable or not. If there's absolutely no market for my wine bottles to be recycled, please tell me. Don't tell me that you are just going to take them and we're going to pretend they're recycled. That's ridiculous, because perhaps maybe we need to look upstream in the waste system and find out who actually is responsible for that. Should it be the mayors and the municipalities and the city taxpayers holding the bill for these externalized costs that weren't built in higher up the stream, or somebody else is making a profit? Whose responsibility is it? And as mayors, you need to be able to say, this is our collective responsibility. This is what the city should be taking care of. This is what the taxpayers fund. This is how we should be doing that. And drawing the line where you're now taking care of costs that are externalized from someplace else where they're making some money, and you're picking up the pieces because you're at the end of the line. And I think it's really important to be honest about those things as well. I also critically believe that we need to think about One Water. There was a great One Water conference that some folks in this room attended last week. You spoke at it, Mayor Dickerts, with my Mayor Stephanie Miner, and Wendy Kellogg from Cleveland State University was there as well. I was not. I love the concept, but I really think taking the idea of what's made the Boundary Waters Treaty so durable over a long period of time is you have core principles. And when I was at the Northeast Midwest Institute Summit back in the spring, we had an impassioned speech by Congressman Kildee, who from Flint, about Flint. And so few years ago, before I was a commissioner, I had the pleasure of testifying before the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on the establishment of a Clean Water Trust Fund. I've been very interested in having us solve, closing that deficit in our water infrastructure for a very long time. So I was able to testify to members of Congress in support of the Clean Water Trust Fund, which had some really great ideas in it. So I asked the key staffer for the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, after Flint and other concerns that we have in other places, is there a renewed interest from Congress to look at a national infrastructure bank, a clean water trust fund, whatever the vehicle would be to actually deal with this incredible gap we have in water infrastructure? And I really like working with staff because they will give you straight answers. And he's like, no. There's no interest because not everybody, there's not a consensus of where that money would come from. So that tells me that's our fault, that we failed. And failure's okay, because then we can fix it. We just have to know what it is. So this region comes together. We have established the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy that provided the framework for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and significant progress has been made, as you heard earlier today from Cam Davis, on areas of concern, of the great work on the Asian Carp Coordinating Committee and reducing the instances of aquatic invasive species, on some habitat protection, which we'll hear even more about some exciting stuff happening in Buffalo. But where we haven't made significant progress of all those priorities of the Great Lakes Regional Collaboration Strategy is water infrastructure. We all know the problem. I've been talking about the problem for 15 years. You all might have been talking about it longer. I'm done talking about the problem and think we all should be on the same page talking about the solution. We don't need a new organization. We have all the existing capacity right here, but we need to be lockstep. Here, I'm looking at a budget that comes out that increases SRF funding in the United States for drinking water, good, but reduces water for the clean water SRF, which is, how could this community that cares so much about water not find that acceptable? That should be just as acceptable as me driving around with 3 kids floating around in a car with no seatbelt. That's not safe for us. There's nothing more important than water. So I wanted, so back to this principles, and it's how you get to, we all know what these problems are, but what's the right dose? We heard earlier today, and it's really what's the pace and scale of change? And that's what you all are. You're change makers. You're the leaders in your community. So I think a collective principle-based approach from cities, from counties, from industry, from agriculture, from advocates that recognize that we have one water, that we must think about water first when we're talking about policies, we're building roads, whatever we're doing, water impacts it because it comes from the sky and it's going to land on whatever the surface is in the built and natural environment, that we need to look at what those environmental justice and fairness issues are, that we need to make sure that folks are able to have access to water that's not cost prohibitive, but that we actually pay for the services that we receive at the same time, and how to balance that. I don't think there's one prescription that's right for everybody. We did a recent study in Onondaga County, not the IJC, this is just me as a citizen, but the county pulled together a bunch of experts and looking at different opportunities for modernization. And one of the key findings that came out of that really struck me is that the most common form of government has to do with water districts, because that's what you do. You bond, you have a nine-house housing subdivision that comes up, you create another district, you kind of make those pipes go larger and larger, and how inefficient is that? And to really think about, many of our cities were created when we had to go to, downtown on horseback. So have we been able to keep up with what the real realities are? So staying core to our principles and making sure that we're smart with all those modern tools. Everybody is walking around with, most of us here have 2 phones, so we are incredible data users and data generators. How can we use that as we integrate that into our smart cities, where we have folks that are able to download an app and they're driving in their car, not on the phone, they're being safe drivers, wearing their seatbelts, and and they hit a pothole, and that registers right there to your DPW. And so they're able to start putting that in your queue. You had there's very exciting things out there, and so how to move beyond that. But when the cities are stuck in a crisis mode because you don't know when the next water main is going to break, you don't know when the next backup's going to happen, you don't know when the government might shut down, and there might not be your community development block grant that comes in to help support the programs that you depend upon, you aren't able to move forward with those big ideas. And so you taking the time and the space to come here, share ideas, and think about the future all together, I really, really appreciate it, because we do not do our best thinking in a place of crisis. It's important to respond. They always say don't let a good crisis go to waste, but you need to have the thinking to make this happen. I think the collaborative approach is critical. You need to make sure that everybody's sitting around the table, that you don't agree with everybody except for on that one narrow question that you're working on. So you have as many diverse voices at the table as possible. Now it's really important that we keep water whole. And so some of us have, separate drinking water systems. It's not one unified utility, but they still matter because I still drink water and then that water goes someplace. And it has to be treated before it gets out into our waterways. So if it's coming through the pipe for drinking or leaving the pipe, it should be cleaned and returned to the hydrologic system. We have completely changed the hydraulic system, and that's going to happen. We change things. We call beavers nature's engineers. We are one of the most transformative creatures on the planet, but we need to be aware, and I really think we need to look at the highway bill. There's other resources, every single road we build, all of the buildings, that all influences our water course. And so at the end of the day, we need to think about the main principles of what water does. And water does best when you slow it down, you spread it out, and you allow it to soak back in. That's the cycle. That's what we've disrupted, and our cities can work with that. And oftentimes, it's actually not much more expensive for you, as long as that's just the question or the thinking as you approach the problem. So in the city of Syracuse, and Onondaga County in particular, we're home to no longer the most polluted lake, because we've really cleaned it up. It's Onondaga Lake, and for both toxics, mercury, there are about 22 pounds of mercury a day that was discharged into Onondaga Lake at some point in time, but also significant amount of sewage pollution. And so we were one of the first communities that received an amended consent judgment under the Clean Water Act to require 6% of all of the capture for reducing the CSOs through green infrastructure. So having that requirement, that protection that we're actually going to use softer green infrastructure as opposed to only concrete, and you got to have the gray, but we really wanted to see what else we could do, was great. And it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't a requirement. And so that's where we get into these arguments of what's regulatory, what's voluntary, but at the end of the day, these are about our protections collectively, and there's a benefit to having us moving from the same level playing field. And so I think Mayor Hope, oh good, I have 5 minutes. Mayor Hope, is he still in here? Anyway, I appreciated that question about, having local adopters, not wait for the feds, not wait for the state, and that's what the cities have to do because you have no other choice. But on the, when you're talking about agriculture, if, you may not want to spread, you may think it's a really bad idea to spread manure on frozen or saturated ground, but unless you have a $100,000 cover for your manure lagoon, and it's been raining cats and dogs, and these were built for when a 100-year storm really happened every 100 years as opposed to every 2 years, you don't have, it's either it's going to fail or you're going to spread it. I mean, there's real decisions where we are. So, being able to realize that things have fundamentally changed, that we need to look at the engineering standards, we need to be prepared for what nature's going to give us, very critical. Oh, I have some IJC business I have to talk with you all now, okay? So we have I went off on some other issues. So we have a specific role under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. We have several of them. It's a wonderful honor and privilege to be able to be given this role by the U.S. and Canadian federal governments. They'll be coming out with their first triennial assessment of progress under the new Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. We have copies of them back there if you haven't read the document. Again, great read, and it's not just because I'm a policy wonk. Maybe it is. But some really key important things happened in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. So Dave gave me too much credit. I didn't come up with expanding the entire membership. I think a broad-based involvement is very important, but the government's included that in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement as well. They've also expanded, so I gotta give credit where credit's due. We also, they also have recognized that water quality and quantity interrelate, which we all well know, especially when we're dealing with stormwater flooding issues. Also recognize that, that it's really important that we are assessing those progress. So there's great principles at the beginning. It's another principle-based approach. The IJC will then be reviewing and doing some consultation on the parties' assessment of progress, as well as producing our own triennial assessment of progress. And so I have a couple dates for you. I've got 2 minutes. I got a couple of dates for you to pay attention on your calendar. So in September, when you're back from the beach with your nice, wonderful tan, you look for your parties' report on their report on progress. We call it the PROP. There will be a forum, which is very important every 3 years. The first one's going to be in Toronto on October 3rd and 6th. Really hope the cities come out in full force on both the U.S. and Canadian side. I think it's really critical. You are the main agents of change that get to do this first. The IJC will be hosting a public comment session in the late afternoon on October 4th, where we want to hear directly from you. So I fully anticipate the cities will have many things to say on indicators and other important measures of what progress is and what you expect. This is the first 3 years, so it's really about where your expectations are and what you want the federal government to do to help you. We're also going to be doing evening town meetings in the Toronto City Hall and in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on October 18th. So this are just a few key things that are coming up there. I'm going to close on algae. We had a great session on algae. There's definitely no silver bullet, as you saw, but really a lot of work we need to do. The threat of excess nutrients blooming into toxic microsystem bacteria is real. It's influenced by the rains, the wind, and what is land applied. Our streets, parking lots, and other surfaces convey nutrients faster to the tributaries and contribute to the fouling of our beaches, and they threaten our water intakes. We could save Lake Erie and our embayments. We've done it before, but we have to double down our efforts. The water's hotter, it's coming faster, and more intense. And we need to integrate the idea of water first and what it does into all elements of planning and private improvements. Valuing the service it takes to operate and maintain those softer green infrastructure is a smart way to work with nature and not against her. And we all know she's the senior partner. So thank you very much for all the work that you do.